particular conference today because it's such an important and intricate platform on which to explore, I think, some real dilemmas. And I speak as somebody who inhabits shades of grey as often as I inhabit places of certainty. And I would like to both apologise and claim the space for the difficulty of there not being enough discourse in public about this sort of territory, because I think that it makes it extremely hard in a country that thinks its democracy is a matter of sort of non-negotiation now. It makes it extremely hard to raise the debates about the detail of democracy with enough regularity for us to become athletic and practiced about how we fight to preserve every corner of democracy. And it's that potential for being in an old marriage, as a friend of mine said to me just now. You know, if you're in an old marriage called democracy and you kind of take it for granted, then you don't know after 30 years if you're suddenly going to get a note on the breakfast room table saying, gone off with someone else. I would also like to commend Peter for being here in uniform. I mean, we're all sitting here in uniform. It's just our uniforms aren't as obvious, although mine probably is. But you're a named institution, the police. But I think that I'd like you to recognise the fact that actually we are all named institutions if we represent something like South Bank Centre, and we're all involved in the same negotiation about civil society and the space for artistic expression and object expression, and I'll come to that distinction in a minute. And so in just raising my first anecdote, I want you to know that this is an example of something which I think happens so rarely and is so ludicrous that it sort of throws into relief some of the more insidious and deeper issues. A friend of mine, Penny Woolcock, and you'll probably be familiar with this story, some of you. Penny Woolcock is a wonderful documentary and fictional filmmaker, theatre director, opera director. She does lots of things. But she's always operated on looking at the hidden stories and giving a platform and validating a hidden story. And recently she made a film called One Day that was set in Birmingham. And it was about gang culture in Birmingham, among black boys in particular, and the inevitable level of death and destruction that was happening to them and their families because of gang culture. And she made this, what I believe to be a really extraordinary musical called One Day that was made with the gangs themselves, and they were the actors in it and so on. And it was to get its premiere in Birmingham. She thought it was fitting that its premiere should be with and for the young people who'd helped to make the film. And then she got calls on the day from various cinemas to say they'd been instructed not to show the film. And when she inquired, she was told the police had rung around to say that they wouldn't actually stop the film being shown, but they were advising cinema owners that this was likely to be a moment of total civil unrest, and that they would have to warn them in advance that this could be the case. So, unable to get the film shown in any premiere cinemas in Birmingham, they went and hired or persuaded, I'm not quite sure which, anyway, they persuaded somebody, they got a cinema, and they invited all the people to come. And they were halfway through the film when the police arrived and invaded the cinema and stopped the film, told everybody to leave, and gave as their reason that they'd been called to the place and that they didn't have enough instructions, they just knew that the film had to come to a stop. Penny went on the Today programme and with somebody from the police to demand an explanation. And the police said, we had a telephone call to say the projector had broken and we came to see if we could sort it out. Now, just as a piece of PR, I think that's a very, that put the police, for me, in a kind of terrible and sympathetic light, because it just demonstrated to me that they had obviously done something, been instructed to do something. Who knows what it might have been a local issue, I don't know, maybe Peter knows anything about it or not at all. But it was an example, I think, of the police genuinely fearing that this was going to be an inflammatory event, which it apparently wasn't. And then not really knowing quite what language to use to justify it. And indeed, probably in the statement that we thought the projector had broken down, really realising after the event that there wasn't really justification. The film never got premiered as a result, and we at the South Bank Centre then staged it ourselves with a number of families whose children had died from knife crime, and had a debate about the issues and so on. And it was not a place of public unrest. But it really made me have this double attitude, talking about grey spaces, of sort of appalled at the idea of it. And I also thought, gosh, it's in the territory of ridiculous that something that we debate all the time in very vicious and difficult and unmediated territory, from the Daily Mail, the Sun, the News of the World onwards, the sort of vilification of young people, the lack of addressing some of the issues that might go behind this, that this is all uncensored and can pour pure into our psyches, and yet a film that is negotiating this territory in a semi-fictional way is deemed to be a space where great harm can happen. And I think it really goes to the heart of what I imagine in all our training. I don't just mean the police, but I mean in all training around areas of authority. I think we have neglected the territory of training ourselves about not just the detail of democracy, but where artistic expression hangs out in that space around the detail of democracy. I think we take it for granted, those of us who sort of champion it, until we reach our own grey moments. But in general, there is not a lot of debate about it. And I think that although the cartoonist and the genre of cartoon may hold a particular and specially guarded, although not in sanctified space, I think the artistic expression that takes ideas into difficult spaces, it is quickly viewed to be indefensible. And it relates to our general attitude towards art, our fear of art, our suspicion of art, our being unnerved by art, and actually our notion that the artist is by nature not only a subversive but a bit of a hanger-on. And it seems to make the artist's role in society almost illegitimate in terms of being able to be a place at the table. And I think so I don't think it's just about the police, I think it's about where we place artists generally. I went to a conference, I chaired a conference a while ago in Switzerland about looting, where Interpol and our own police were there. And it was really about the right to protect objects. And when they arrive in Switzerland as looted objects, do the police feel that they have an obligation to go in despite Switzerland's laws and challenge the holding of those objects? And there was this incredible evidence from weeping curators from Baghdad talking about how when war broke out, the museums, yes, were invaded by professional looters, not just random acts of savagery, but professional looters who even brought diggers in on helicopters, landed them in the desert, drove the diggers to ancient tombs, shot the security guards, dug up the prized objects, and then took to Switzerland and stored them there. And the debate was about the fact that there is no known place, not UNESCO, and not civil laws, that guard the notion of not only the right to make artistic expression, but also the right to then hold those artistic expression guarded on behalf of the people. So at the moment, UNESCO are trying to pass a law about protecting the object for the civil society. I didn't know that didn't exist, if you see what I mean, but it all seems to me to relate to the same thing, which is that there is an ambivalence about whether the object of meaning, unless it has known fiscal worth, whether the object of meaning has meaning and for whom it has meaning. And the role of the artist is totally negotiable in society, depending on whether people feel like having them around or not. Now, in a society like ours, where we are going out selling, whether it be to the Olympic bid in Singapore or the creative economies of Brazil, we are selling the idea that one of the USPs about the UK is its unique ability to be creative and to turn that into many kinds of expression. If at the same time we have such an ambivalence about the role of the artists and our right to protect the artists, then I think that, again, it suggests that we have an undernourished conversation around this area. And that might be even more endangered, strangely enough, by this particular point in time when democratization of the arts is something that we are holding forth in a very proactive way, myself included. There's been huge excitement about the possibility that audiences move from being splendid appreciators to being active makers. And this is undoubtedly changing the way that art gets made, it's changing the conversations between artists and audiences, and so on. And in that change of making and receiving, there is the great potential for all of us to understand a lot more about the way that art plays out for us. But it also has the possibility, and you'll see this from yesterday with the furore over Opera North and the cancellation of the opera that happened there, that you can suddenly have the reverse, which is that an audience who are now the participants, as in the case of Lee's opera, will suddenly say, we don't like a bit of your script, and 300 of us are pulling out because we don't think that young people under the ages of 10 should discuss homosexuality. Now, that idea of Lee Simpson's opera being pulled because the audience, stroke participants, feel that they have more sway than the artist, again takes you into very vexed places of, are they right because they've become the artist? You know, if all your actors walked out of a production because they said, actually, we're not happy with your message. So imagine, 12 actors walk out of a Carol Churchill play. Where would we sit with that? But 300 non-actors, but acting in a production, walk out, or are told to walk out by their parents. And the community really are in that total grey area of whose rights can we defend. Lee's rights as an author, or the 300 children who are the participants, whose parents clearly feel that it's fine to discuss the Holocaust, but not to discuss homosexuality. I think that going back to the police, we must be tremendously glad of the police that we've got, and also very glad of the police we haven't got. It is very chastening to come back from Brazil, where the police are still thinking about how far they go with regard to sort of shoot on demand when they have too high a spate of young people in a favela who they just think it would be more useful and tidier if they just sort of eradicated them, where many aspects of the police are still in such a space of corruption that it's unlikely that they're going to get around to discussing defending an individual artist for quite a long time. But our police actually are in a place where they are part of our fine democratic process. And I think that it would be wonderful to hear from Peter about really what level of training, what level of debate, what level of discourse the police feel they've been able to engage in around the idea of defending people's right to express as opposed to defending people's property. In a way, it is property. It is our property. Artists make property for us. And although only some of it has obvious fiscal value, what it has more than anything is this notion of a free flow of ideas. And even if those ideas are deeply uncomfortable, I have to argue that they are not more uncomfortable for most of us than turning round and seeing the pornography on the top of W.H. Smith's and considering where that lies with regard to censorship. When Shakespeare wanted to demonstrate that a society was either benign or had the potential for flexibility, had the potential for change, he always employed a fool. The fool was always there. And if you had a fool, it suggested that you had the capacity for wisdom, even if you weren't choosing to listen to your fool on that occasion or in that period of your life. And this fool had a number of things. It was looking at what men and women have concurred as precious and then digging about to expose the sordid underside. The fool was anything between a Freudian analyst to a reductive forcer. And fiercer, compressed versions of truth were what Lear's school, for example, offered. And it wasn't Lear that hung his fool, but Lear created a state, eventually, through a disregard for other people's voices, a disregard of democracy, led to a place where inevitably the next regime that he'd really engendered, they would hang his fool. So my question is to us, we're fine with the celebrity artists, and we're fine with the artists who sort of got their reputation in a good place. But are we fine with the fool, with the artist who might be just taking that poking stick and digging us all in the ribs or even in the eye? Is it something that we're all prepared to defend, regardless of aesthetic? Macbeth didn't have a fool. And I think that is the final thing I wanted to say, which is even myself, in my great moments, you know, you find yourself saying, well, do I think the thing that is being attacked is good or bad in terms of its art or its argument? And I'm very, very much looking forward to this morning, teasing out to help me find myself into clearer water, because good or bad is not really the point, is it? It's the right to talk about it, the right to say it, and the intelligence of the audience's right to take from it anything they wish. We have to believe in audiences' capacity to hold themselves in an intelligent space, and the more you give them the arguments, the more audiences, that's us, feel that our maturity is growing. And so it doesn't at all suit our society, and in fact it harms our society, to protect young black audiences in Birmingham, or the community, again, in Birmingham, with regard to Caprete's play. It doesn't suit our desire to make sure that democracy isn't a fixed state, it's a moving state. It's something which keeps growing and develops more and more sophistication. I just wanted to end with a story that is more extreme, but I think relevant because of where one could get to. A friend of mine, in his 60s now, late 60s, was brought up in a concentration camp until he was 4, and then he and his mother were brought over when the war ended to Britain. And he lived a normal life, if you can make that normality happen. And he was an accountant. His mother was dying, and she was on her deathbed, and she asked to see him, and she said, I need to tell you something. And he was very nervous about this encounter, because he felt that she might reveal something to him that he already, you know, had a lot of things to deal with about his memories. He was 4 when he left, but he thought she was going to reveal something maybe even more horrific. And she said, I've got to tell you something. He said, what is it? And she said, you're left-handed. And he said, what do you mean? And she said, in the camps, you could not be left-handed. You couldn't have anything about you that was different. And you were left-handed. And I had to stop you being left-handed. But I've got to tell you now, you are left-handed. So he left the hospital. And he said, even as he walked away from the bed, he knew he was a completely different person. Everything about him, his body, his understanding, everything changed for him. He knew he was a different person. He was a left-handed person. He went on to be the treasurer of the Royal Society of British Sculptors, and has spent the rest of his life making extraordinary and passionate pieces of very large-scale sculpture about the Holocaust. He was an artist. Not everybody who's left-handed is an artist, but if we suppress some part of ourself or some part of society, some fundamental expression of who we are, then we'll forget. And so I think we should be grateful for the artists who remind us that we need our left hand. And even though the left hand may do something that is left field, actually, where would we be without it? Thank you.